Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Tuesday. We are together again for an author interview. I hope you're having a great week so far and that you had a good weekend. Our weekend was relatively quiet, but we did spend most of Sunday with some friends of ours who have a place here in Portugal but who live in Germany. So it was always so much fun to hang out with them. We speak, I think I know maybe 10 words in German. They speak pretty good English. I mean, compared to our German, their English is impeccable. But then we fill in the gaps with Google Translate and charades. And our one friend is just, she makes me laugh so much with her facial expressions and her hand gestures. She gets her point across. But we always have so much fun with them, and just the way we communicate always makes me smile, because it gets a little silly sometimes, but it's always a lot of fun. So I'm very glad that we got to spend Sunday with them. As I said, author interview. Today I am speaking with author Kristine Ochu about her novel, Campfire Confessions. It is about three women who are all childhood friends, and they've all come to various stages in their lives that they need some help from their childhood best friends. Let me go ahead and read you the description from the book. Annie, Sandra, and Joe were the best of childhood friends, but they haven't seen each other in far too long. To the outside world, their lives are perfect, but appearances can be deceiving. Married to a pastor in a small town she's never left, Annie's devoted her life to family and the church. Most people consider her a saint, but they don't know she's hiding a big secret. Sandra's living it up, married to one of the richest men in LA, and appears to have it all: beauty, brains, and a successful career. But when a real estate deal becomes more than just a transaction, she quickly realizes she's in over her head. Joe is 4 years sober and struggling through a divorce. After a one-night stand takes an unexpectedly comic turn, she's forced to reckon with a lifetime of bad choices. When Annie's secret catches up with her, Joe and Sandra rush to her side, escaping on a hilarious canoeing trip that turns into a soul-searching, death-defying adventure. Lost in the woods, as one thing goes wrong after another, they find themselves sharing their deepest secrets around the campfire. But as each new revelation unfolds, one thing becomes clear. It will take more than a night of true confessions for the three of them to find their way back home. So this is, as I said, about three women, childhood friends. They've all come to these various points in their life where they need their childhood friends. They need to figure some things out, and this trip is kind of the catalyst that gets them all talking to each other, asking for help, looking for solutions, doing those sorts of things. It made me smile on numerous occasions because Annie is a Midwestern Lutheran, and there's not a lot in it. It's not like that's the sole focus of the book, but as a Montana Lutheran, it just made me laugh. I've mentioned that before. So there were lots of things in there that I resonated with, and and there's some. It's one of those. Once they go on the trip together, this camping trip, basically, if it can go wrong, it's probably going to go wrong. But it is all of those things that go wrong are more steps for them in their paths of self-discovery and figuring out what they need to do next and how they need to work through these problems that they've created in their lives. So you've got three strong, struggling, funny, loving women who,
Welcome to the podcast.
no,
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate it.
who are very human, who are facing human problems, and who I think many of us will resonate with because of those very human problems. So let's go ahead now and turn to the interview. Again, the book is Campfire Confessions, and the author is Kristine Ochu. Hi, Kristine. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate it.
Very happy to have you. We're going to talk about your book, Campfire Confessions. But before we do that and get to the story and the plot, if you could share a little bit about you so my listeners can get to know you a bit, that would be great.
Yes. Well, I grew up in a small town in the northern woods of Wisconsin, outside of Hayward, Wisconsin, actually. And this is where the World Lumberjack Championships were held and are still held. So I grew up kind of as a lumberjill. I used to log roll and compete and won the Senior Amateur Log Rolling Championship when I was 14, and just kind of fueled my love for adventure, which has kind of impacted my life to this day. And I basically went on to college and got my master's in human resources, and I had a career in human resources in the corporate world. And then I was able to leave that to pursue my creative interests in writing. And starting off with screenwriting, I actually ended up writing like 6 screenplays, 4 by myself, 2 with my sister, Lorene Lacey, and then a children's book that I created for my 2 little granddaughters. And started I have a workshop, empowerment for women workshops called Creating Your Amazing and Adventurous Life, which kind of led me to writing Campfire Confessions. So that's a big little nutshell there of my background.
Yeah, it's hard to, compress your whole life into a few sentences. But I am impressed with the log rolling champion. That is, I have no balance.
Well, I'm impressed with your adventure and moving to a new country. So we both have a love of adventure.
Oh, you're very sweet. Thank you. Well, let's talk about the book. As I said, it's called Campfire Confessions. Can you give an overview of the story?
Yes, it's a story about 3 best friends from childhood who have all just really made some big mistakes. They've had big, messy mistakes, and their lives are spinning out of control. And when one of the secrets explodes, the 2 best friends race to the side of their friend, and they escape on a hilarious canoeing trip where they bond over their old childhood stories and memories, but then morphs into this soul-searching, death-defying adventure where they have to rely on each other and discover their inner strength in order to survive.
Yeah. What was your initial inspiration for the story?
Well, it was interesting. It took me 5 years to write this book. And I had thought about it, a number of times and started writing pieces of it down here and there. But I really felt women were ready for a fun type of action adventure book, something a little unique and different. And I also felt that friendship is just a core need for women, that we need those best friends that we can really be our authentic selves with, even on our worst day, right? Where might call a friend crying, and by the end of the conversation, we're laughing. So I wanted to bring that kind of level of friendship to the readers because I felt like they really needed that. And along with some levity and laughter and friendship, I wanted to also to weave in deeper themes such as self-love and letting go of past mistakes and self-forgiveness, because I think those are also real core issues that women face every day in their lives or sometime within their life. So yeah, I wanted to be relatable, meaningful, and enjoyable.
And there's so many layers actually to unpack in this story. We could spend hours because, as you said, there are the layers of friendship. There's the layers of self-doubt and trying to find a balance in your life between yourself and your family and your career and all of those different things. There's the layers of your spirituality and how that interacts with your everyday life. There's it's really rich with the layers. Did you go into the writing wanting to make it that complex, or did that flow out of the story?
Thanks for that question. I went into it wanting it to be that complex. Yeah, I wanted it to, you know, be that deep type of story where you have to dig in and thoughts. And some people get it and some don't. I would say more women tend to get it, and it's led to some amazing book club conversations and discussions. And then some women have just really just enjoyed kind of a fun ride of a read, and just kind of more got into the action adventure and, remembering their best friends and the laughter that they shared. But yeah, I intentionally did weave in tools and there are three almost different spiritual attitudes that each character had of how they saw things and how it impacted their lives.
This is a little off topic, but you mentioned book clubs, and there are questions at the end for book clubs. How does that? I've never asked this question. Do you decide that you want to put questions at the end of a book? Does your publisher decide? How does that work?
Yeah, well, it's such a popular thing now that they really encourage writers to put them at the end of the book. I did write the questions myself, and I remember sharing it with a friend to say, "What do you think?" And she said, "Wow, these are pretty deep book club questions. I'm not sure if my book club would have the courage to dive into some of these." And actually, it's just been the opposite, though. Women have absolutely loved these questions and have dived in deep. So, even when you go to a bookstore, I actually went into two local bookstores and where I live in Amelia Island, Florida. And both of the owners said, make sure you put some book club discussion questions in the back because readers look for those.
Interesting. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I don't think I've ever thought about it before. Okay, so on this, my moment of self-discovery, let's go ahead and take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, Kristine will be talking more about the three main characters, Joe, Sandra, and Annie, and what about them is going to maybe connect with readers for each character. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author Kristine Ochu about her book, Campfire Confessions. Let's return to that interview. So back to the story, the three friends, Annie, Joe, and Sandra. Can you talk a little bit more about each of them and how they might resonate with readers?
Right. Well, someone gave me a review saying that these characters were perfectly imperfect, which I loved. And then a Book Life Review said that an immensely relatable, expertly written tale of female friendship and coping. And what I tried to do with these three characters, Annie, Joe, and Sandra, was to make them real. Like, they would be your best friend, or there's parts of them I know that are parts of myself. And so, just really wanted them to not necessarily be the girl next door, but to be that one friend that you're lucky to have and that you cherish. And so with Annie, what I did with her as far as a character, I had her be the wife of a small town minister in a small town in northern Wisconsin. And her life has kind of become composed of just doing everything for everybody. She's a mother of 4 boys. And between the boys and the church and community and everyone's expectations of herself, she just begins to really lose her sense of self, who she is, her self-identity, because she just keeps giving pieces away of herself and never taking time for her and to fill up her own cup. So I really wanted Annie to represent self-love. What which is a real big issue for women. And I speak more to women than men because I am a woman. But I know men, I'm sure, struggle with this as well. But it does, I think, because of the issue of so many women that are mothers and the sacrifices that they make, and then juggling that in careers and everything else, that they find themselves depleted of energy, and can lead to anxiety and depression, which Annie starts to battle with. So that's a little bit about Annie and her discord of that self-love and needing to learn how to come to take a better care of herself. And then you have Joe, who's 4 years sober, who is close to getting a divorce from her Native American husband, Louis. And Louis really wants her back with her 2 children to be a family again. And Joe's just caught up in the shame and embarrassment of the mistake she made when she was in her drinking days. And so she has to really come to terms with, why does she really want to divorce Louis? Is it because she doesn't love him anymore? Or is she really running away from, having to face up and, realize some of the hurt that she has, put on some of these people? And, she does feel guilty, and she does have enormous remorse, but she also needs to learn self-forgiveness and letting go, which is so powerful for anybody in this world. And then with Sandra, I wanted to create this character, this woman that seemed to have everything. She had this childhood where she was the rich family in town, and she was beautiful. And then she goes on to have this magnificent real estate career, and marries this super uber rich man out in LA and has this lifestyle that everybody would be envious of. But inside, she's lonely, and she's become kind of in a sexless marriage. But it's deeper than that. She has wounds from her childhood when she lost her mother that have never really healed. So she finds different ways to kind of numb that wound. And I think that's another thing people can relate to. So that's a little bit about the characters.
Thank you for that. And actually, I wanted to bring up something that might seem a little bit odd, but it's not a closed door romance. There are some scenes of intimacy between some of the couples in the book. But I wanted to say that it was nice that there's a sex scene between Annie and her husband, because it's the pastor and the pastor's wife, right? It's a normal sex scene, but it's like actual couple having marital relations, right? And it's not just this sort of how to put this? It's not graphic, but it's also not just like missionary. They're a normal couple. So thank you for presenting them in that way, and not as sort of some paragon of, oh my, they're holier than other couples.
Right. And actually I'm glad you brought that up as well, because it was a question that got asked when I went back to my hometown in northern Wisconsin this past summer. And, I know people that are wives of ministers and whatnot, and they just kind of reminded me of Annie in some ways, and that she has a sexual appetite and she is normal. And someone said, "Oh, so do you really think people are having sex in small town Wisconsin?" I'm like, well, the elementary school is full of children. I think they are, and I hope they're enjoying it.
Yeah. Oh wow, that's funny. Did you do any particular types of research specifically for the book?
I did a little research on canoeing, although I'm an avid canoeist and kayaker, and I get on the river all the time. But just a little bit about that. And I almost feel that my whole life has been researching this book in some ways, just through my own journey of life of, having a first marriage and getting a divorce and being a single mother of 2 young little girls. I think they were ages 3 and 5 when I was divorced. And then, went on to have a career, but juggling that and my daughters and the stressors and whatnot. But I also was in human resources. So I also worked with a lot of people in different situations where, as a HR person, you almost have a psychologist hat on at times as well, right? And so, you hear the stories, you learn the stories. And then after I left the corporate world and did my workshops for women, I just would hear a lot of stories as well. And so I just kind of gathered pieces of the women in my workshops and people I met in my career and my own experiences and the experience of my friends, and really just kind of brought them together, almost like alchemy into this story. So yeah, it feels like it's been a lifetime of research, but not anything where I guess some of the research would be that each of the characters has different empowerment tools that they use, whether it's tapping. I'm not sure how familiar the audience is with tapping, but it's a type of acupressure where you use your fingertips, and it's become very popular to help reduce anxiety in this world. And so there's 365 acupuncture points in our body, and we also have these meridians, these energy pathways under our skin. So when you tap on certain parts of your body with your fingertips instead of a needle, you're helping organs and muscles and tissues, produce healthier reactions and produce healthy chemicals in your body. So I have one of our characters, using tapping. So I researched tapping, I researched meditation, creative visualization, and also, different forms of energy medicine. So each of the characters uses some of these tools throughout the story when they need to. So I think that's probably where some of the latest research was kind of just going to those fields of self-help and human potentiality.
Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot of music included in the book, not only with Annie and her background, but also between three friends and Annie with her family. Are you musically inclined?
I love music and I love singing, but I am not a good vocalist. And I have a piano, but I've never gotten too advanced. I have a guitar. I've never been too advanced, but my family did really love to sing. And I grew up in a Lutheran church and I was in the choir. And so all those things did, play. So I'm not musical, but I enjoy it very much. And I really appreciate other people being able to have those talents. I wish I had more of that, to be honest. But I do feel like music kind of lifts our souls. And I think music is a great way to connect with emotion. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
And for people who did not grow up in a Lutheran church, Lutherans really love their hymns and they like to sing in 4-part harmony. So even if you can't do it yourself, you hear it around you.
Yes, that's so true. That brings back memories. That's for sure.
Exactly. Let's talk a little bit more about character development and how that works for you in terms of your writing. Do you like to have a really solid picture of each character before you start writing, or do you like that to evolve more as you write?
Yeah, no, I really like starting off with the characters. I spent quite a bit of time, really writing out the characters and development, everything to what did they look like? How tall were they? What kind of color hair, eyes, muscular, not muscular, hobbies. And then I really worked on kind of dialogue, speech. How would they talk? Would they talk fast or would they talk slow? Would they kind of be more hip type of language? And just really in gestures, such as Jo, for example, she loves to put her hands on her hips and look tough, even though she's not as tough as she looks, from the outside. And so I really did spend time on each character. What were their biggest issues? Where were they starting? What did they need to learn? What was their character arc going to be? And what were some of their unique characteristics that would make them separate and distinguished from each other? Because I think it's hard when you read a book and everybody just kind of blends into each other and the characters aren't, individual enough. So I work hard on making each one different.
Time for our second break. When we come back, we're talking a little bit more about these characters and the possibility of them returning in some fashion in another book. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with Kristine Ochu about her book Campfire Confessions. Let's go ahead and return to that interview.
Would you consider going back to these characters? The things are both wrapped up and also left open at the end, and I won't give anything away, but would you consider going back to these characters?
I was not going to, because I think sequels are really tough to write and to keep them interesting. But I've had so much feedback from readers saying, we really want to know what happened. You've got to tell us, you got to write a sequel. So I actually am going to write a sequel. I'm going to try anyways. And I've got some ideas. I've been jotting down ideas. I tend to just start writing notes. I mean, unfortunately, I'm not the most organized person. So I love notebooks. So I have notebooks where I write pieces here and there, and then I have to stop and just gather them all up together and type them up. And that's just one of my crazy creative processes. And another suggestion I've thought about is maybe taking some of the children of these characters and maybe doing a story with them, and they can kind of, reflect back on their parents' journey. But I do think I'll start with the sequel first and just see how it plays out. But it's got to be good. Otherwise, I just can't do it.
Right. Sure. I don't think you're alone in your notebook obsession. I talk to a lot of authors who have many, many notebooks. So there's something there.
Yeah, there is. It's good to know. I didn't know that. Now I feel better.
Okay. Really, really hard hitting question here. But so there's a scene where Annie eats she is in the hospital, and her congregation reacts as many congregations do by bringing food. And so she eats Jell-O and she eats tater tot casserole. I grew up in Montana in a Lutheran church where we had potlucks, and we referred to it as casserole, but all of my Midwestern Lutheran friends yell at me and say it's hot dish. So where do you fall on the casserole hot dish debate?
Oh boy. Jeez, you know what? I would probably, in Wisconsin, I would say hot dish. But I moved out to the East Coast, so I think I turned into like the casserole. But if I was home, gosh, and going to a church thing, it'd probably be a hot dish. Are you bringing a hot dish?
Yeah. So then my question was, it said tater tot casserole. Does it have green beans? Because then, hot dish usually is the full meal or no, is that casserole? Oh, see, I get them mixed up.
Yeah. I guess the tater tot casserole for me is one I did make for my kids. So, it's basically, hamburger and the tater tots, some type of cream of chicken soup or cream of mushroom soup, and maybe chop up a little something else and throw it in, right?
Yep.
But it does bring me back that when I do say green bean, I would say green bean casserole, which is interesting.
So I don't know. It's an ongoing debate amongst Lutherans and possibly just Midwesterners.
Love it. I love it.
You mentioned a while ago that you'd written a children's book for your grandkids, and I'm assuming it's the one called No Pooping on the Dock.
It is No Pooping on the Dock.
Can you talk a little bit more about that, just because I love the title?
Absolutely, yes. And it's the No Pooping on the Dock, the owl, and the wacky, loony, crazy, and naughty ducks. And so it's a story. My two little daughters, they were about 3 and 5 at the time, actually, and we were babysitting, my husband and I, and of course, they went nap for us, and we were at the lake up in northern Wisconsin, and we had a statue of an owl on our dock. And they were having a meltdown around 2 in the afternoon. And so I made up this story about this owl because they said, Grammy, why do you have a statue of an owl on your dock? I said, well, it's to keep the ducks away because the ducks like to poop on the dock, which is true. Anyone who's had a dock knows the battle of the ducks pooping on the dock or the geese. And so I made up a story about this owl that magically comes alive. And every morning it has this good breakfast and it goes out to the dock and he's willing to share the dock with anyone and the ducks. He has one rule, no pooping on the dock. But one by one, these ducks come up and they break the rule until they drive this owl absolutely crazy until he chases them away, never to be seen again. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love it. But it also reminds me that Jo in the book tells her daughter's stories. And there's a story about the crow and the wolf. Is that a story that you created or a story that you found in Native culture?
It's a story I created. It was very interesting. When my father passed away, I started to find crow feathers. And it felt to me like my dad was trying to comfort me and to let me know everything was okay. Because it was a very sad situation. And I was recently divorced, I think at the time as well. So, I was going through a personal challenge as well. And then through studying some of the Native American spirituality and also love studying the meaning of animals and reptiles and insects and, in different cultures, whether it's Native American, it goes back for hundreds of centuries in all kinds of countries. Ted Andrew has this amazing book called Animal Speak, where he studied, animal meanings in Russia or China and South America and United States and South America, North America. It's Ireland, Scotland, Finland. It's just amazing that this work. And these cultures look at different animals, like an owl perhaps, and it means different things in different cultures. So I did study the meaning of the wolf and then brought it together and created the story. And I actually did have a few other stories that I had written like that, but I ended up taking them out because I felt like it was taking the reader out of the story. But I did leave that one in. But I did do have a little file of just a little more of adult fairy tales that maybe that would be a fun book to actually publish someday.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the possibility of a sequel, but are you working on anything specific right now?
Yeah, I have so many things I want to do. I just need to live a couple more lifetimes. And I have a children's book that I started, and it's because this summer my brother and I and sister found this baby owl. It was about 2 weeks old, and it had fallen out of its nest and it was injured. And so we called and found a hospital, an animal hospital that would take the owl to rehabilitate certain raptor animals. And it was in Spooner, Wisconsin. It's called Winged Freedom Raptor Animal Hospital. And so I met with the head vet there, who's all 100% volunteer work, and she's the director of it, and brought this little owl that I named him Spunky. So we found Spunky, and Spunky was near death. And I was like, no, we cannot let him die. So I put Spunky in our little red truck. My husband had taken our other car to the gym. So he left him in this little red truck. I didn't know we're almost an E as far as gas goes, and the air conditioning was broken. But Spunky and I went on this big adventure, 40 miles or so, and all the way there, I was like, Spunky, you gotta live, and he looked at me with these big eyes and this big trusting eyes for an owl, almost like saying, please help me, and got in there safely and handed him off. And the vet said to me, don't get your hopes up. He's pretty bad. He's pretty badly injured, and all his vitals don't look good. But we prayed for him for days, and the whole community actually rallied because I love, reaching out on Facebook, and I shared his stories and the pictures, and he had all these wonderful, supporters, and he rehabilitated, and he actually got to the point where he was able to fly again and flew away. So we believe he's out there having a good life. So I think that would be a really fun story to tell from Spunky's eyes. The house. We named him Spunky because we just felt he had the will to live. He had a lot of spunk. So that's one project. The other is I really feel that one of the big messages in Campfire Confessions, whether it's letting go of past mistakes or forgiveness of self or others, all really falls under the umbrella of self-love. And the more I talk to women and the more I'm on my own personal journey, I just start to realize how powerful this topic is and how we have to learn that, just like being on an airplane that we hear, put the mask on first before you help others, is that we need to fill our cup up first and make sure that we are loving ourselves and know how amazing we are, and to praise ourselves and recognize our strengths, because then it just makes us stronger, more confident, able to be there for others. So I'd like to kind of dive a little bit more into whether it's a self-help book on self-love or if it's a fictional book where self-love is really a big part of the character development in the story. So that remains to be seen. I start writing at night in my head, and then I kind of wake up in the morning, jot down ideas. So I've been leaning into that more lately. So I'm curious to see what you think about the issues of self-love for women. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh my goodness, I have a lot. It's something that I encounter in my conversations as well. It's just something that seems to get pushed further and further down the list. The more, if you have a career, if you have a family, whatever it is, it tends to get pushed down. And women, I think, are sometimes taught to put others first, which can be hard on your own self-esteem, on your own mental health. So it would be an interesting journey for you to take, whether that was self-help or fiction. And actually, fiction might be, depending on what you write, that could be accessible for a lot of people. Not everyone likes self-help, but then again, not everyone likes fiction. So I just talked myself into a corner.
But no, but I actually, when you said that, even as I said to myself, I resonate more with the fictional story, which is also why, in Campfire Confessions, I could take this and I could change it into a kind of a self-help book with some of the messages in there, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted it to be a fictional story because I think it does reach a broader audience. And if someone wants to look and find those messages, they're there.
Right. So. But even in Campfire Confessions, you've got things like the different ways that the women cope, whether it's yoga or the tapping, or you just kind of briefly mentioned snippets from the pamphlet that Annie reads and how counting backwards from 100 in a certain way, or the breathing exercises. Even that in a fictional story might resonate with someone.
Exactly. Yep. So, well, there's a plan.
Final break of the podcast. When we come back, more about how Kristine came to write novels, in this case, for publication. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the backdoors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Kristine Ochu.
You mentioned writing screenplays, so you've written in various capacities. Is it something that you always wanted to do? And what made you decide finally to write for publication?
I think ever since I was a little girl, I had this dream of going to New York City and being a writer and living in a really cool loft, and whatnot. Well, my path changed a little bit and got married, and of course, I had went to college, and then had two little ones. But I always did want to write. So the screenplay, when I left the corporate world, I just such a visual person that I thought, I'm going to look into screenwriting because I love movies, and I had this desire to write a movie script. So I studied quite heavily. I was in Boston, Massachusetts at the time, and there's an organization called Harvard Square Scriptwriters, and I was joined that group and then took courses and whatnot. And Harvard Square Scriptwriters would take a script, you'd take your script and they would workshop it. So you'd walk into a room and there'd be maybe 10 to 15 other writers who have read your script, your screenplay, and they would give you a little 5 minutes of feedback, and the rest of it was a brutal hour of constructive feedback and criticism and ideas and suggestions. But it always made the story better in some ways or another. But it's a really tough business. It was almost 18 years ago when I was writing the screenplays, and there wasn't as many outlets, and it was really tough. I think the odds were like 0.03% of getting your script kind of ever bought and produced. I had some close calls. I won some awards, but I never was able to sell the big one. So I basically put that aside and picked up a camera, and I thought, well, I'll do some documentary filmmaking then. And I did that for a little bit. Mostly with log rolling, the World Lumberjack Sports, but some other side projects. But just that love for wanting to just write, I thought, you know what, write a book, because this is a thing that I think is the most wonderful thing, is that we have this world of self-publishing now. So anybody can write a book and anybody can get their book published, and it's so liberating. And I think it's just been such a gift for people, whether they want to write a memoir that they can share with their family and their children, and or to just have that creative outlet. And now the rate of being a success or a bestseller author is definitely challenging, but just to be able to get your book published, it's accessible. So I decided to write this book and get it out there in the world and work really hard at it and make it the best I could.
Mm-hmm. From that experience, then, do you have advice for someone else who might want to write?
Yes, and actually this is advice that was given to me, and I think it was great advice, and it was by Kerry Casey, who is a writer. He's a self-published writer, and I saw him at a farmer's market type of thing, and I asked him, his process and whatnot, what was his advice going to be? And he said, well, just write it. Just start writing your stories. And that was the truth. For me, even with the screenplays, even before I learned how to technically write the screenplays, I was writing stories. I've been writing stories actually since I was 8 years old. And it was one thing one of my childhood best friends and I would do, would sit down and write poetry and stories together. But the advice would be, don't get hung up on doing it all right. Write your story down. Think about your characters, write those notes down, put them in those notebooks. Once you've got a good outline of a story, once you've kind of got your arc of a beginning, middle, and end, and those characters have a beginning, middle, and end as well, and some of the challenges you want to give them and how you want to see them grow, and what obstacles you might want to put in their way, and who's going to be a protagonist, who's going to be the antagonist, then you can go back and worry about story structure, and if you're doing it, right. Not that you can't do both at the same time, that you can't study first then write, but I think what I've heard from so many people that want to write a book but never do, and they say it 10 years later, I want to write that book, but they still haven't, is they feel like they have to write it properly, grammatically correct, right structure correct the first time, and it becomes overwhelming, so they never start. So I just agree, just start. Just sit down in front of the computer, set your timer for 30 minutes. To me, that's one of my best tricks, is to set the timer, whether it's on your phone or some other device, but for 30 minutes, and just start to write, because anybody can usually sit down for 30 minutes. And what usually happens is you're in the zone after 30 minutes and you just keep writing until then suddenly you might hit a wall or lose an idea and it's time to quit. But that is that's the best advice that I had and can share and pass on.
Thank you for that. How about reading? When you take the time to read for yourself, who are your go-to authors and genres?
Well, I am a little crazy with this because I am in 4 book clubs. I love books. I tend to listen a bit more to audiobooks these days. Just I'm in the car more, I'm around the house and whatnot. So I have a widespread type of books that I love. I'm just listening right now to Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmis, who I'm really enjoying that book. I just read a self-improvement one called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I read The Maid by Nita Prose. I love Kristine Harmel. She's going to actually be here on the island for the Amelia Island Book Festival that is happening. The luncheon's on the 27th. She's coming to us. She's a New York Times bestseller. So I'll be meeting her, and she's going to be presenting The Sweetness of Forgetting, her 10th anniversary edition. She's also written the Book of Lost Names and whatnot. I love The Kitchen Front from Jennifer Ryan. So, and I also love the independent authors. I think it's really important to support those. Brian Skillen wrote this book called The Way Through a Field of Stars. And Lisa Tolles wrote 95, which is kind of an action, murder, mystery type of thing. So I have a very eclectic kind of view of books. And I think that's the beauty of book clubs too, is that, you read books that you may not normally read. So.
I'm not part of a book club, but I do have a book review podcast where I read a lot of books that I wouldn't normally read just because I might not have heard of authors. So I absolutely agree.
I just love your book, review podcast. You're definitely such a gift for authors to give us a voice. So thank you for what you do with that and for your love of reading. It's wonderful.
Thank you. I grew up in a family of readers, so it's just natural. How about your internet presence, website, and any social media that people might find you on?
Well, yes, my name is spelled with a K, so it's Kristine, so it's Kristine. And my last name is just 4 letters, Ochu, Ochu. So Kristine Ochu. And I just decided to use that as is on Facebook. I have a personal public page as well as an author page. And I also have a Campfire Confessions group page that I welcome the readers to hop on. I'm very active on Facebook, I would say. I also am just really loving Instagram and embracing that. So I tend to share some fun things on Instagram. And once again, it's at Kristine Ochu, as well as Twitter. So I kept it pretty simple for the audience. And even my website is just www.kristineochu.com. And that's an easy place. You can hop on that website and there's links to purchase Campfire Confessions, as well as No Pooping on the Dock. And there's also just information about my workshops that I teach. But there's also 2 blogs. One's on self-care tips and some other ones on motivational tips. So just kind of small little things you can do every day to just lift your spirits up and keep you motivated. For example, it might be, have you praised yourself today? Pick an object in your room, and every time, whether it's a refrigerator, let's say, and every time you walk by the refrigerator, you say something nice about yourself, or you say something nice to somebody who might be there, or you can say it out loud about them anyways, right? And little tips like, smiling in the mirror for 30 seconds. It's amazing how smiling is free, accessible, but if you smile, research has proven you start to produce healthy chemicals in your body. So there's really some fun tips on my website as well, and just, how to stay in a high vibe, happy state of life.
I remember once in a workshop, they made us do, not made us, but one of the extras we did was laughing yoga. And it's just the act of laughing for no reason. You can just, it will produce the same endorphins, whether you're laughing at something or just laughing.
Yes. Isn't it great?
It's ridiculous when you look at people just standing there laughing for nothing.
I love it. Yeah, it's just, we all know there's nothing like a good belly laugh, right?
Exactly.
And yeah, yeah. So there's, I'm just really, I'm happy to be able to share that as much as I can with the world, these great tips and tools that I've learned in my life. So
Wonderful. Well, Kristine, we've talked about a variety of subjects, including, laughing yoga and hot dish. But is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to bring up during our time together?
Well, one thing too, Campfire Confessions. I know pooping is available on Amazon as well, and I also love, when we can support a local bookstore. So I encourage people, if you can and you have one, to always do that. It's also available online at Barnes and Noble. But the big thing is that, if you read the books and you'd like for me to meet with you in your book club, I've been doing virtual book club meetings, and they've been really a lot of fun for the participants and myself. And I'm happy to do it. It's a really good time. I've done it, whether it's kind of someone who meets for coffee in the morning, or it's an afternoon book club or a night type of thing. So don't be afraid to reach out to me at KristineOchu@gmail.com. Or you can go on my website again and just fill out the form there, the contact form, and my phone number's on there as well. So I wanted to make it easy for people to reach me. And I hope that, if they love a book that's a little different and they want to read about women having an adventure and has some action in it, think about kind of Eat, Pray, Love meets Sex in the City, meets The Alchemist. That's a little bit of what Campfire Confessions, I think, is about, and adding some fun adventure on a river and nature. So I think it just is something different and unique. So if you're ready for that, I think you'll really enjoy the book.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about writing and about Campfire Confessions, and also no pooping on the dog, which I just like to say. It's funny.
Love it. I know it. I have to say that as a childhood grandparent, parent, child favorite book, I am amazed how many people have stopped me in the street saying, I love that no pooping on the dog book, and that my kids love to say no poop, especially when it's really meant for ages like 2 to 6.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just the prime age where kids love to say that word.
Exactly. It's the best topic. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much too, and all the very best to you.
Thank you once again to Kristine for joining me to talk about her novel, Campfire Confessions. As always, I very much appreciated her taking the time to do so. It's always fun getting to know people, and hopefully she she didn't roll her eyes too much at my Lutheran. Was it fangirling, or was it just like appreciation? I think it was appreciation of recognizing things that are familiar to me in a book. We're always talking, and I mention a lot that representation matters, and this is just a very small example of that, because I'm not saying I'm not represented in books. I'm one of the people who is more represented in books than some other people might be, but it is funny or fun and kind of nice when you recognize something that you know to be true in a book, and other people might just read over a sentence and not really think about it, but you read that sentence and go, yeah, been there, done that, okay. So I probably talked about tater tot casserole on the podcast before. Definitely, I'm sure I've talked about Jell-O on the podcast before, but at any rate, I was just saying thank you to Kristine for talking to me about writing and her book and taking the time to do that. If you are a fan of women's fiction and stories of close childhood friends, if you're a fan of stories where just things do not go exactly as planned, but they go the way they should. In the end, they work out the way they probably should, although the characters would never plan for them to go the way that they do because of the craziness that ensues. But if you're a fan of those sort of zany stories where nothing quite goes right, then you should definitely check out Campfire Confessions. The relationships are great. The friendships are great. It's wonderful to see these women who are not perfect and who we might recognize parts of them within ourselves and recognize things that we've also been struggling with, and to watch them support one another and love each other through it. So yeah, if you are looking for a read and want to go camping in Minnesota, maybe it's getting cold where you are and you want to, well, it's spring there, but maybe it's getting to be winter where you are and you want to just think about camping and having a campfire outside, sleeping in a tent in the great outdoors. Or maybe you'd never do that in person, but you're good to read about it, and you should definitely check out this book. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another episode. As always, hope you'll join me for the next episode as well. But in the meantime, if you're a fan of this podcast and you haven't done so already, please, I'm going to go through the spiel as always, but please leave a review, written or starred, either way. Very helpful to get this podcast out to more listeners. If you are not doing so already, also like, subscribe, follow on whatever podcast platform you listen to the podcast on. That way you'll always know when there are new episodes. And follow on social media. Interact with me on social media. Love hearing from listeners. You can find the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. It's Tuesday. It's interview day. Hope the rest of your week goes really well. Hope it's already going well. And as always, I hope that no matter what happens in your week, you manage to find plenty of time to get yourself lost in as many good books as you can fit into the space you have available. Thanks so much.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.